jarak sekolah sniper dari sekolah.
So most of our focus is we've looked at consumer Phitidis appropriate one of our big projects is maybe Pavlo is using some previous people, so we go and use strategies and move them to get funding. If we get innovative step up, I think that's the best way to counter wrote the money and we wait for 50 years. My business portfolio was 5 years, but 1% so we know not big to buy anything to fund, making more than
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Business Book Club. Oh my goodness, can you believe it? I can see that there's a lot of social distancing happening, not so much at that table, but I hope you guys are family. But can you believe it? This is our first event, not of this year, it is our second event, but our first event after lockdown. So we are very, very privileged this evening to have another Business Book Club event. Who here is at the Business Book Club event for the first time? Excellent. Lana, welcome to the Business Book Club. Welcome, guys. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. And really, just a little bit of background about what the Business Book Club is about. We've got Pavlo here. He wrote his second book. The whole audience has read the book. So we're going to go into a Q&A immediately after this. And yeah, for those of you who don't have the answers, we've got tables, we've got tequilas, and a few other party tricks. But really, guys, the Business Book Club started in April 2017. We started it as an organization where we can share knowledge. Because the reality is, and I think we've coming out of a space and out of a period of crisis where we didn't know a lot of things. But the reality is, you sometimes don't know, not sometimes, you don't know what you don't know. And that's a very dangerous space to be in. The moment that you obtain knowledge, you allow yourself to elevate your level of consciousness. In other words, you become more aware of your thoughts, your thinking, and then you have the ability to change and make choices about your behavior. That's why reading is imperative to your personal growth, because otherwise you will just be regurgitating your own freaking thoughts. Because you repeat about 80 or 90% of your thoughts that you had the previous day. So on a daily basis, you repeat 80 to 90%. So you've got to get new stuff into your head. It's imperative. But the purpose of the Business Book Club is because we here are mostly privileged. The purpose of the Business Book Club is to share knowledge and to give knowledge to those who do not have the means or the access to the knowledge as easy as we do. Now tonight we want to thank you guys for the contribution that you've made in paying it forward and allowing the Business Book Club to donate books to those in less privileged communities. And tonight's count, Bruce was 16 books. Great, guys. Thank you very much, because every drop, every book can change a life. So your 16 books means a hell of a lot to us and to those that are benefiting from it. Thank you. Big round of applause, please. All right, so tonight is about sharing knowledge. But before we do that, we've got a competition that we are running. Bruce, would you like to share to our members what the competition is about?
Good evening, everybody. So as a Business Book Club, we like to keep things fresh and interesting, and mostly we want to spread awareness about the Business Book Club. So on the table, I've put together sort of a leaflet for you guys to read through, but there's a competition, and whoever has the best picture or video or anything interesting that captures the imagination about the Business Book Club wins a book signed off. So all you're going to do is follow the instructions that are on the note over there. Is basically tag the author, tag the establishment, tag the Business Book Club on your picture on Instagram. And at the end of the evening, there's somebody sitting somewhere out of here, far away, who's adjudicating. They'll whisper to me, and I'll announce the winner at the end. May the best person win.
Thank you, Bruce. Bruce, is there a hashtag in it as well, or is it just the tagging?
It's the tagging and the hashtag.
Is it the tagging and the hashtag? And what are the two hashtag words are? The Business Book Club. Oh, just the one. All right, excellent. Okay, so without further ado, let's start our evening. And I'd like to welcome Pavlo to the Business Book Club. Welcome, Pavlo.
Thank you.
Pavlo, this is your second interview with us. We appreciate your time that you're spending with us and sharing your knowledge, because you don't know what you don't know. But Pavlo, I mean, I've I've had people that, they attended your previous book launch just the other day. And they were like, how did you do this? Was it a question of the publisher didn't like all the stuff you wrote in the first book and they said there's a part 2 of it? How did it come about that you were able to firstly produce another book and to produce it within such a short space of time, which is not normal for normal authors?
I got conned. That's why it's here.
Okay.
Do you want the long story or the short story?
The
A
interesting
medium story. Is medium more or less right? So I got a terrible phone call, a horrible phone call, in late December last year from 2 businesses that I work with based out of Hong Kong. And they started to describe the conditions of the lockdown. And it was terrifying. Honestly, we were still unsure as to whether COVID was real or not. We thought that it might be a flu instance in China. And the Chinese government had acted very quickly, as we all noticed and we saw. And they started to describe the environment that they were now facing. And these are 2 well-established businesses with long trading histories, family businesses. The individuals entirely dependent on the businesses. And I was thrown into a position where I never had answers. And I thought, gosh, this is going to move from east to west, because that's what pandemics do. If you look at the history of pandemics, they move across the nation. And very quickly, as a business, because we work with so many people, both here in South Africa, but also in the US and in the UK and in Europe, I thought we better put together a plan of action. So about 3 weeks before the lockdown took place, I worked with Pippa, who's over there, and I said, we are going to do a thing called a webinar. This thing called a webinar. And we went onto YouTube and we looked up a little bit about webinars, and we found a webinar platform. It wasn't a webinar platform, it was a Zoom session, so it was a Zoom meeting. And we sent messages out in social media, and next minute we had about 1,800 people in a meeting on Zoom. In a meeting on Zoom. This is before we can figure out how the whole thing works. And I put together content that I had used to try and help our clients in Hong Kong, called Build a Business Battle Plan to Survive COVID. And we delivered the content, and Jacques, I started to look at the chat, and the chat started to ignite. And I was reading the chat as I was delivering the content, and after we finished that, we placed it onto YouTube, and it got watched again and again and again. And my publisher, Pan Macmillan, turned around and said, you need to convert that into a book. And I turned around and said, it's not going to be possible. There's just too much going on at the moment. But if you meet Terry Morris from Pan Macmillan, she looks like you. She looks sweet and innocent and nice and kind.
Sweet and innocent.
She looks sweet, innocent, nice and kind. And she looks empathetic. She makes it as if she understands your plight. And then inside that velvet glove is a steel fist. And I landed up saying yes to her, and 100 days of hell began.
100 days?
100 days of hell, because whilst that was being written, I was dealing with the most profound number of crises across 5 different countries in the lives of business owners. And we managed to get it out. We managed to get it out eventually. But it was, I would never have done it. At the end of it, I thought back and thought, gosh, I would never do this again. It was an impossible timeline. I felt as I wrote it, the content that goes into there has the ability to lift people out of some terrible circumstances. You would have read one of the entrees in one of the chapters over there was a message I got about a business owner who had committed suicide. And it was completely unnecessary. So I was getting a lot of those calls in the midst of writing this book. It was a difficult period, huh? Not so easy to do.
Yes, I can imagine that. Just reliving it can be quite hectic. And I mean, you probably slept very little. You had to help people survive. I mean, that's really what it was. But this is not the first time you've been in a crisis, Pavlo.
No.
What's one of those sayings that you have on this a sailor? A smooth sea does not
make a skillful sailor.
Make a skillful sailor. So you've been through some of these crises. And I mean, share with the audience a bit about the curve, the curve, and your experiences, how you went through that curve.
So there were two benefits. In fact, I think the opening lines are something like the muscle memory and scar tissue of the first business I built at the age of 20, thinking I was clever. Because at 20 we think we're clever. Had really not come back to haunt me, but have come back to serve me. And the story is that at about 21 years of age, I was very heavily influenced by an article that my father was reading in the newspaper when I was a kid. And he would come home from work and he would sit down on the couch. He was a lot older than me. And he would pull out the newspaper. And I remember seeing on the front page of the newspaper, I think it was the Star newspaper, a business bought for R1. And I didn't really understand what it meant. And I said, Dad, what does that mean? And he said, well, son, this business was bought for R1. And I thought to myself, wow, businesses are cheap. They're cheap. It's not that hard to get into business. And I found myself in a position where I found a business that was in the hands of 3 business owners who were a lot older than me, maybe 40 years my senior, 45 years my senior. And they agreed to sell me the business for R1. And I agreed to buy the business for R1. Because as a youngster, in my head, that's what I understood businesses would be sold for. And I remember walking into the business on the day that transfer took place. And this genius over here bought the equity of the business, not the assets of the business. They walked out smiling. I walked in smiling. And I remember looking at the staff in the business, the employees. And in their eyes, they had pity and dread. And I thought, gosh, what's going on? This is a very weird setting. By the end of the week, the 3 sellers had immigrated. 2 went to live in Australia, 1 went to live in England. By the end of the month, the phone began to ring. And I owed Standard Bank and ABSA 4.2 million rand. And you are just on 21, just the other side of 21. So the way that you do a turnaround is the way that you respond to a crisis. And when I wrote the book, I was reflecting about the COVID crisis. And in reflecting on it, I thought about that first business I bought. I then repeated it with the second business. But subsequently, since then, I have lived through burst water pipes destroying all my stock. I have lived through large corporate clients not paying, period. I have lived through IP theft. I've lived through, you name it. It's literally any business owner has lived through it. Jacques, it made me realize that in many ways, we face crises every day. And if we could develop a strategy to cope with a crisis, it would be profoundly useful. Because the thing is, as a business owner, you mostly feel on your own, and you mostly are on your own. You might be in business with your father, you might be in business with a partner, but the problem when you're in business with someone is eventually you start thinking alike. And in a way, that groupthink makes you on your own. The second thing about running a business is if I build a business, typically I would build it against my interest, my passion, my skill, my strength. And let's say I create an upholstery business. My knowledge will be deep and profound on glues and fasteners and on materials and on the process on how you upholster something. And I will live my life for 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years. And I'll be reading the Upholsterer's Trade magazine every month. And my circle of friends and colleagues and peers and competitors would be people who are either suppliers or customers or in the upholstery sector. And all of a sudden a crisis comes and hits you, and you are out of your depth. Because what happens with crises is that most people, especially in COVID, decided to upholster better. We play to our strengths. And when that doesn't work, you then for the first time face loss. And I drew very, very actively on the loss aversion curve, which was discovered and articulated beautifully by a woman called Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who's an American-Swiss psychologist. And this woman, who I think she died about 4 years ago or 6 years ago, she is the data version of Mother Teresa. She committed her life, her entire life, to understanding how people recover from the loss of a loved one, someone who has a profound, meaningful impact in your life and gives your life meaning. And when I first presented this in Build a Business Battle Plan, people thought I was nuts. And what's interesting is that the people who thought I was nuts weren't business owners. And with respect, there were people in corporate, or there were people who were employed. Because the thing is, as a business owner, when you build a business, not only does it give you purpose in life, but meaning in life. It's an expression of your creativity. It's an expression of how you can make the world a better place in your own mind. It is the essence of your income and the economics that supports you and your family. And when that's about to be taken away from you because of things beyond your control, it's no different emotionally and psychologically to having a loved one suddenly discover they have a terminal illness. And the grief curve works as follows. The first thing you do is you deny it. And remember, nobody wanted to actually get their heads around COVID. We saw it coming in December. It started to build in January. It started to build in February. In March, we eventually announced a 3-week lockdown. And we thought, lockdown, 3 weeks. The number of people I spoke to that said, hey, I'm going to take it as our December break. They thought it would be over. So you go through denial. And as denial transmutes towards the event becoming a reality, you go through a period of frustration, and it expresses itself as anger or fear. And I remember in February, the beginning of February, all the plans that we had laid out this year, with the launches that I had happening in 3 areas around the world, I saw them all going out the window. And the way I expressed my frustration was in anger. I was livid. I remember driving home from work, and I rolled up my windows, and I was glaring at every single person in the traffic. And one poor person forgot to indicate. I let rip. I was furious. I said things to them about their mother, their sister, their uncle, their aunt. The window was up, so it was safe. But the anger, the expression of anger was profound. And then Elizabeth Kubler-Ross says, once you get through the anger and fear, and the event takes place, you find yourself in a well of depression. And depression is where things can go horribly wrong. She then argued the way to get out of depression is to act, to do something physical, to experiment, and find a new way of living without the loved person that was in your life. And as you act and you see what works, double down and do more of it. What doesn't work, discard it. And you will find a new way of living without that person, where you can have meaning again. And the reason I thought that was so important is because you can never dig yourself out of a crisis if you're in a depressed state. Because depression prevents you from seeing everything you have, and it prevents you from seeing a path out of hell. And if we reflect back and think about it, Robin Williams, right? Successful beyond anything, gifted with a humor that was unbelievable, loved by people globally, who ended his life because of that depression. And a depressive state prevents you seeing or hearing a route out of depression. So in the book, I write a lot about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, because the way that you emerge out of a crisis is by first leading yourself out of it psychologically. And that as a device is then useful to understand how to work with your team. Because members of your team will be at different stages on that life cycle. Your customers will be at different stages on that grief curve. Your suppliers too. And if you don't know how to evaluate somebody in relation to where they are on that curve, your words can fall on deaf ears. And when you're in the front of a battle, your words have to be felt and acted on.
Sure. So that's a very useful analogy, and the book describes it very well, because you could use it in any part of your life. It's not just a business relation topic. But bringing it back to business, like you're saying, like you've got to act something, you've got to do something. Have you got examples for us so that we can understand more about what that looks like? You know, so if I'm a business owner and I'm feeling depressed, or I'm feeling like shit, man, there's a dark hole. Like, what are the type of things that some of your clients or people that you know, what type of actions have they taken to get them and to start on a trajectory and maybe end with a success story?
So in the book, there's 6 tools that I use to cope with stress and to cope with disappointment. And here's the thing, you know, it's such an interesting debate, because if you have an ambition to build a business and to make a difference and to do something special, you immediately set yourself up for a crisis. They're imposed crises, like COVID was. It was imposed on all of us. But I face frequent ongoing crises, which are self-imposed. So for example, if you decide that in growing your business, you want to hit a certain stage of growth, and you might indicate it in a turnover number, or the number of clients, or a new product launch, whatever the case is, things go wrong. It's the nature of life. So you have a crisis imposed upon yourself. And in those instances, there are a series of techniques you can use to get yourself under control and to get yourself on the other side of the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross curve. Because Jacques, nothing you do in a depressed state will yield an outcome for you. Acting immediately empowers you. But the ability to act needs you to be moving out of a depressed life cycle into a space of acting. After that, I always go, and Ishmael, you and I had the conversation earlier, I go immediately to where the source of revenue lies. And if you think about why a business exists, one reason only, to solve a problem. And if you don't know what problem your business solves, you don't know what business you're in. It's very hard to find a direction until you've understood why you exist. And you solve a problem because of somebody you serve. And the amazing opportunity that lies behind any crisis is that when a crisis arrives, especially one like COVID, which affects everybody, crisis means change in state of health. That's its pure definition. I was in one condition of health, now I'm in a different condition of health. What I've noticed over the years is that every time there's a crisis, it means that the status quo has changed. And when a status quo changes, it means people are ready to receive a new idea or new information. So now the challenge is, you're ready for change, you're ready to hear what I have to offer, but so too has your problem set changed. And if I don't recognize how your problem's changed, the problem I was solving before with my service or product that I have now won't be relevant for you, even though you have changed and you're ready to receive a new piece of information. And that's where this strategy comes into play. I call it a battle plan. There's a wonderful book that I recommend everybody read. It's called Startup Nation. In fact, I wish our government would read it, inside out, back to front.
Now, what's it called?
Startup Nation.
Startup Nation.
There's a country that has 9.5 million people in it that attracts 38% of global venture capital. Exactly, Israel. And the reason it attracts that money is because it leads innovation through technology. And the reason it leads innovation through technology is because it's at war with all its neighbors. And the only way it can find export markets is by developing tech-related products. Ironic that. But the author writes around why there's innovation. And he writes about a story where an officer, everyone has military conscription for 4 years, it's compulsory. So I go, I become part of the Israeli Defense Force, and then you go to a military college if you're going to be an officer. And the officer goes and he studies the theory of battle and Sun Tzu and whatever else he studies. And then next minute they're flown into the battlefront. And the battlefront is urban warfare in Israel. On the ground you have a squad, and the squad is actively engaged in battle. And the officer arrives from college and says, right team, 4 of you go left and the others of you go right. And next minute, these troops turn around and say to you, you go left, I'm not going left. You go left, you're going to get your head blown off. And he says, but hang on a minute, I'm an officer. I'm a lieutenant, and you are a corporal. He says, lieutenant or corporal, you go left, and I will follow. 5 seconds later, and you'll get your head blown off. And that's the way that the Israelis communicate. So when it comes to innovation, and you have an idea, and you tell me to do it, if I don't agree with your idea, I openly disagree with you, and we debate actively. And that process, what we would see as conflict and insubordination, has been harnessed effectively to yield the best out of a team. So if you look at it, when you face a crisis, and you have to find relevance again, by simply upholstering the chair better, it doesn't resolve the problem. You've got to go to the person who buys from you, and you have to start a conversation, what we were talking about earlier, of empathy, to understand how your circumstances have changed, with the view to, through relationship, know how you need to change your offering to make it relevant to that client. Because if you go to your client with a transactional mindset, which is the knee-jerk reaction, I need to do a deal with you so I can get income, given the uncertainty. I won't hear you, I won't see you, and I won't engage with you in a manner where you will open with me to lead my innovation for me to make my old business relevant as a new business today. And that's the toughest chapter over here. There's the knee-jerk reaction. Buy the thing from me. Let me drop my price. Let me almost con you into the transaction. Because if I don't get the cash flow running, I might be closed tomorrow.
and I can't feed my family, and you know, the consequences are serious. It's not, oh, it's fine, I'll just open another business. But I mean, Pavlo, you know, in your book, you refer to these stories, and I mean, has anybody read the first book, Pavlo's first book? So there's a few. So I mean, it's really, really worthwhile, and he really buttons down some good concepts in there. The second book is where the case studies come out, and in Reset, Rebuild, and Reignite, there's a lot of clients that came to you and said like, Pavlo, there's just like no ways I can do business in COVID. I have to redesign things completely because, and I think the one example that I'm thinking of at the moment is the interior designer. You know, like how do you do interior designing when but she reinvented herself. And there's a specific methodology that you use in getting to that. And I love those stories because you always send them back to go and ask someone questions. but share that story and share that methodology because I think that is profound. I mean, earlier today I was speaking to Pavlo about the Business Book Club, and you know, we're looking at doing things differently with the Business Book Club next year. You know, in terms of our donations, the value that we're offering to the authors, and we've got to pivot. And I was speaking to Pavlo, and he said something profound to me, and it comes out of his book as well. He said, he didn't say, Jacques, your problem is, but he could have said that. Jacques, your problem is that you were thinking from your perspective. I'm thinking of the Business Book Club's problems, which is not the problem you want to solve. So share with us some of those problems and how innovative, so that people can understand what does it take and actually think like, oh shit, it is possible.
So, you know, what's really interesting in this book, which I don't include much in the other book, is the number of services businesses in this book. I speak about extensively. And I can talk about the interior designer, but the one that really gave me the most pleasure was a recruiting business based out of the city of London.
Okay.
Now the UK, in fact, the whole of London, the UK economy is 80% services driven. So it's architects and professional engineers and advertising agencies and recruitment businesses and interior designers and property letting and property development. And London specifically, I still can't figure out why they've Brexited. I don't know. Well, I do understand it, but it's madness. It's an economy that's built to service the United Kingdom, but also to service Europe. And most of their export comes through services. So an 80% service-orientated, service-driven economy generating a significant portion of its export revenues through services into Europe that they're now telling to get lost is going to be an interesting outcome on the 1st of January. But this particular business was involved in recruiting. And what happened in the UK, and I remember being on one of my first calls as COVID lockdown came in the UK, and it was with a group of business owners, and we were troubleshooting what we could do, and next minute someone said, well, look, we've just put our staff on furlough. And I never knew what the word furlough meant. So very quietly on one of the other screens, I start going onto Google, typing in furlough, and furlough is where government pays 80%, up to 80% of your staff's salary to the tune of £2,500 a month for them to stay at home and not work, in the hope that you won't make your staff redundant, and in the hope that you can start again once the crisis passes.
Sure.
So the cost of furlough has now put the UK into a situation that is 3 times more expensive than World War II. 3 times more expensive. And it took about 40 years to pay off World War II, to give you a sense.
Did nobody do the sum?
And it's been 40 good growing years in the UK. So this business owner, this lady has been running her business for some time. She was doing about 4 or 5, if I remember, £1 million a year, which is a very nice business in UK terms. and recruitment dried up. It dried up in its entirety. The mandates all fell away, people went into furlough, everyone was thinking, I'm not employing. My personal experience of British businesses is they don't have the same levels of resilience, and they don't have the same level of mental fortitude that I experience over here. We are cut from a very different cloth. And she was about to lose her entire business. What she eventually landed up doing, once I made her call, I think it was about 7 or 8 of her clients, which were all available at home, and which were all happy to engage, because the option of not focusing on work would have driven any of them completely insane. She recognized very quickly that their strategies were already moving deeply into a process of digitization. So she introduced 3 new, after listening carefully, she introduced 3 new services to them at home. The first was she secured access to an app called Tinker. And Tinker is a great little app because it teaches kids how to program and code. So that screen time at home for kids could be useful, positive, and shoot them into the future of work. Because already she started to produce a whole lot of content around how the mandates she had been offered need to be adjusted to cater to a different kind of candidate that would have a natural affinity with technology and software and digitization. The second thing she did is she engaged our services to on-sell into her clients. So effectively, the business we run in the UK is there to work with business owners to help them grow their businesses into an asset of value. And I gave her a technique that I talk about in the book called the onion peeler. And it sounds completely superficial and it sounds very silly. But the onion peeler is the most impactful, effective, simple way to calculate value in any transaction, in any person, and in any business. And she used the onion peeler method to help her clients right-size their business, and specifically to identify which positions in their organigram needed to be preserved and maintained, which positions could be let go of, and which positions that would be new needed to be upskilled and upgraded through candidates with a natural affinity for technology. So over the entire lockdown period, she became one of the most relevant sources of information and partnership to her clients who needed to make the adjustments for their businesses to survive beyond COVID. And of course, what happened when the UK lockdown stopped? She got flooded with mandates. And in the period of, I think it was July, she had a record month after having literally 3 months of 0 revenues. Not a record based on the 0 revenue, but a record in her entire business's history. So the right mindset with a technique or a tool to figure out how to remain relevant and be relevant, so that when you are considering upholstering differently, you're going to pause for a minute because that plays to your strength. And you're going to look at doing things slightly differently, being led by the individual who will determine whether they're going to buy the upholstered product from you or not.
Absolutely.
Incredibly hard to do because you have to rely on other people. But it's a discipline that's vital.
Yeah.
There's nothing more frustrating. And this is an important point, and I write about this in the book. The trick is that in a crisis, and when you're facing severe pressures, you have to constantly maintain on the right-hand side of the Kubler-Ross curve. Because you can come out of depression through a course of action that's giving you a good outcome, only to find that it doesn't work on customer number 50 or customer number 100. And suddenly you're no longer relevant because circumstances have changed again for those clients and customers. And if you don't keep your head, you slip back down into the depressed curve. And that's where it's very difficult to climb out of there repeatedly.
Sure. And I guess that's part of, those tools, the onion peeler, is part of the arsenal to do something, to get somewhere, to act. That's what it is.
It is. But, the onion peeler, what precedes the onion peeler in the process is something called a value stack. And every single person has value. When everything fails, and I'll never forget where I learned this. Aubrey, what's Aubrey's surname? Masango, yeah, that's right. Aubrey Masango at 702. About 7 years ago, he came to speak to me and he said, hey, listen, can you come on to the late night show, the 9 o'clock show? And I said, yeah, what's up? And he said, last night I had the most frustrating conversation with a bunch of listeners. And I said, what was frustrating? And he said, I was debating with them what they're going to do to improve their lot in life. And a whole bunch of people phoned in and said they're going to strike. They're going to go on strike. And he said, but if you go on strike, doesn't it harm the business? How do you improve your position if you go on strike? And they said, but that's how you get a better deal. And it made me realize something. We are not taught to understand our value. In fact, we believe that if we don't have the privilege of an education, we might not offer value or have value. And I did a really interesting show with Aubrey the following night. And we spoke about a value stack. And a value stack begins as simply as this. You, who you are. What skills, what talents do you have? And nothing came out over air. And I said, okay, any listener that believes that they have attention to detail as part of their natural person, phone me. And someone phoned in and said, man, I've got attention to detail. I drive everybody mad, everybody crazy, because I will apply my mind to a thing until I've understood it and the detail has to be perfect. And I said, right, so you've got a perfection issue. Is that good or bad? And we went through a debate about when it's good and when it's bad. Because trust me, if your life's in danger and the nurse serving the surgeon does not pay attention to detail, then it's bad not to have someone who pays attention to detail. But if you're preparing a meal and you have an impatient table who've been waiting an hour and a half for the pasta to come out, too much attention to detail can create very grumpy people. And then the lines lit up. I have accuracy. I'm never ever late. I'm always punctual. And we started to speak about human values. And that makes the first slice of the value stack. Because everybody has value. The fact that you might not know where to apply it or how to apply it is a separate issue. But you need to recognize it first. Then we developed the conversation further. And I said, right, to the one person who called in, where do you live? They lived in Alexandria Township. I said, how long have you been living there? And this is unusual because it's a pedestrian township and it's a transit township for most people. There are very few people who are absolutely permanent there. And this individual said, I've been there for 5 years. And I came into Alex for work, and I've lost my work. And I said, okay, 5 years, tell me about your community. And this individual started to describe the community. And I said, when you sit and see people coming home from work, what do you notice? No, they're very, very stressed. I said, I want you to go and ask them why they're stressed. And then I want you to phone in again once you've understood why they're stressed. And he called in about 2 weeks later to Aubrey's show. And he says they're stressed because of a very difficult ride in the taxi. And they were always arriving late for home. And they had to prepare dinner for the family. And I said, so you've recognized a significant problem in your community? He said, yes, I have. I said, that's value. How are you going to solve that problem? And he said, well, why would I solve the problem? And I said to him, well, if you solve the problem for the person, you've given them value. They will pay you to solve that problem. And that's the essence of any business. So an understanding of your community adds to the value. Relationships add to your value. If you've been in one sector, one industry, for an extended period of time, you know how the industry works. You know how suppliers behave, how customers behave. You know where the risks are. That's part of the value stack. And the thing is that when you're in a crisis and you can't see the wood for the trees, and you're in effect panicking, you forget to interpret and understand your value stack. And that was a key element in helping that recruitment business profoundly reinvent itself. You know what's so interesting? A lot of the service businesses now are arguing that they're going to be baking in remote work in the United Kingdom. And she's already adjusted ahead of that. She's understood the kind of personality that can cope with remote work and the kind of personality that doesn't. So when she recruits for positions that have remote work as part of the work offering, she's already started to interpret the psychometrics in a way to say,
Yes.
he would not be good at remote work, or he would be good at remote work.
Very interesting. Pavlo, I mean, I really want to open up the floor for some questions, because I'm sure you guys have got a question or two about crisis and tapping Pavlo's knowledge on the subject. But I mean, that whole interview that you did on 702, wouldn't that be great if leaders could do that? Or wouldn't it be valuable for a leader to be able to do that with their teams? You know, to have that conversation, to understand from everybody what's the value that you have. You know, we're not talking about I'm an accountant, or I'm an artisan of some sort. What's the value that you bring to the table that justifies your salary?
You know, it infuriates me. So, who remembers what happened late 2013 in this country that led to a 5-month event for the first 5 months in 2014? In late 2013, 43 people were killed by the South African Police Services. Marikana. So do you know the real story behind it? The real story goes like this. Rustenburg has got very deep mines. Platinum mines are deep. They're deep. And when you dig deep, you drill, you blast, you remove the ore, and then you drill, blast, and remove the ore. And you bring all the ore to the surface where it gets processed. For reasons beyond anyone's memory, rock drill operators come from 2 villages in the Eastern Cape only. And deals are done between the chiefs of the villages and the young men. The young men are sent up to become rock drill operators. It has prestige, it has status, it has pay. The chief gets a bit, the family gets a bit, and this man travels 2,000 kilometers to Rustenburg, where he then takes a second home. And in taking a second home, typically outside the mine, in a tin shanty, in a pondok, he finds a second wife to look after him. Because Rockrell operating is a rough, tough business. And he needs someone who's able to care for him, prepare his food, and become part of his meaning and purpose away from his village. And what happened one day is the unofficial wife of a Rockrell operator got fed up. The Rockrell operator arrives home. He steps in and dinner hasn't been prepared and made ready. And he is now pissed off. So he leaves the home and he goes to the shebeen, comes back later, climbs into bed, and all of a sudden, his normally warm, embracing wife gives him a cold shoulder. And he's really pissed off. He goes off to work the next day, drills and drills and drills and drills, comes back up the shaft, and the same thing happens in the second evening. So he gets upset with her, gives her a smack, she smacks him back, everyone's angry. You know why she was so cross? Because the crappy TV that she was watching Generations on had a bad signal. And she really thought that she deserved a better life. So she got onto his back and said, buy a new TV and improve the quality of our lives. And he couldn't afford it. And at the shebeen, when he's sharing his story with his mates, they all have the same situation taking place. And the Rockrell operator knows nothing to do other than to strike. So Marikana takes place because it was a social issue before it became an economic issue. And I had an opportunity to be called in to speak with the mine executive. And I walk into this event in a place called Moinoi, which is where they have the Lachotla. You know where it is, right? And I look over there and there's 16 white men. And all of them are engineers. They're mining engineers. And these 16 mining engineers are going to lead the transformation of the mine. So I stood up to speak, and the first thing I asked is, are we all present and attended for? They said yes. I said, right, I've just got one question before I get going. How many people work in this mine, in Lonman? No, 14,000 people are employed in Lonman. Okay. How many are black? No, 99.9999999%. I said, okay. And I said, so gentlemen, do you see we have already solved problem one? That re-envisioning and repurposing and reinventing a way of doing business when you don't have the majority of your team at the table represented is a problem. Because through no fault of yours or mine, we all suffer from cognitive biases. And I write about that extensively in the book. It's our blind spots. I cannot tell you what's good for you because I'm not you, nor do I represent you. And once we got over that hurdle, the suggestion I'd made, Jacques, was imagine this, reimagining commercial life in South Africa for all South Africans. For all South Africans. I'm a Rockrell operator. I get sent up by my village, and what's given to me is a 20-year career path. Because the physicality of the work is such that I can only do it for 10 years of my life. And if I knew what the career path was for me, and if I understood how to improve my pay by outperforming the function of the job, and if I was given guidance on it, that would surely be the beginning of me understanding the value I add in the greater scheme of things, and it would give me control over my destiny and not make me the pawn of a union. who's ambitious to try and increase rates. And the suggestion that I put down at that point in time was, imagine a discovery vitality program for your team. In a large corporation, everyone who joins after doing a series of assessments, and a year or 2 or 3 years in, you decide which area you believe you have value to add in based on a deeper understanding of yourself, and then you can progress through a career path where you can increase your income by adding value to the process of the business and recognizing that you have meaning and significance. And if we had the ability and the patience to do that, I don't think we would be facing the crises we are facing globally in our democracy. I have 31 US clients. All of them are Democrats. In 2016, all of them, bar one, voted for Trump. And they voted for Trump because they are angry. And they are angry because of a thing called economic exclusion. We understand income inequality, but economic exclusion is growing across the world. It's what led to Brexit. It's what led to Trump's rise. And economic exclusion is mostly being lived and felt by people like you and me. The private individual who craps themselves every day to build a business from nothing, who invests everything they have into that business, who makes profound sacrifices to establish the business and support the business and grow the business, who outside of pragmatism has an idealism where they want to make a difference in the lives of their customer. They create jobs. We pay our taxes because none of us here can afford to bring in tax experts and help us find the loopholes legally, which Amazon can afford to do, and the very big corporate multinationals can afford to do. And our businesses aren't complex enough to create tax loopholes in any event. And most of us, by the time we lift our heads on the 23rd, 24th, 25th of February, have realized that it's tax season and we've actually produced a profit. And had we planned a little bit better, we might have been able to use the money we're about to pay in taxes to scale up the business for next year's growth. But we are so wrapped up in running our businesses, and we are offered so little support of any significance, that it starts to feel like you're just hauling coal day in and day out. So we pay our taxes, and our taxes go across to government, and government sits and says, we need to launch some new big programs and projects. And typically the way we would do this is we would partner with very large corporate multinationals. Because if I'm the Minister of Transport and I go to you and you are the corporate CEO of an enormous construction firm, I'm saying, Jacques, listen, this project is way too big for just regular players in the marketplace. I'm going to use the taxpayers' money. Thank you for paying your tax, madam. I'm going to use taxpayers' money to actually launch this massive transport link. And you should bid for it because you have the resources to deliver it. And by the way, I have another 2 years left in my term. You do realize, of course, I would make an excellent speaker at your AGM, and I would make an excellent board member once I've completed my public service. And the shiny deals that get done at the World Economic Forum, and the shiny deals that get done between big business and big government, have seen most of Middle America and SME America, 30 million SMEs in America, 5.7 million SMEs in the United Kingdom, work harder and harder and harder for less and less of the love. And when Donald Trump said, drain the swamp, all my clients heard was he was going to break the relationship between big business and big politics, and through that level the playing field again. So we experience it within the structure of our democracy, and it's a macrocosm of the microcosm that most people experience within their staffing through their business. It's really frustrating to have to see people as people in a business because it creates a whole lot of complexity. But the evidence is there to show that in the long run, if you don't, it compromises your valuations at the day of exit.
So, thank you for that, Pavlo. Have we got a few questions from the floor? Yes, sir.
You know, like the future of retail, brick and mortar retail.
The future of?
Retail. Brick and mortar retail.
Brick and mortar?
Yeah.
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 I'll hold the mic just for
Yeah.
a minute.
So can I tell you a different future about a reversal back to brick and mortar? What's the single biggest challenge that any business owner has today? Single biggest challenge? Expenses? No. Staffing? No, that's easy to fix. Clients? Guys, we are in a massive, we have been duped. We've been duped. How do you market your business? Who markets their business? Marketing, the process of generating leads from customers you never had before. That's marketing, right? That's how you get people to come to you. And what were we told? We were told that social media is the friend of the business owner. It's a way for us to reach many, many, many future potential clients. And then we got told that the way to do well in social media is to create excellent content, good content, original thought. Because we were told if we created original thought and good content, we would rank on Google, we would rank on Facebook, we would rank on Twitter, we would rank on LinkedIn, we would rank on Instagram. That's what we were told, right? Now, the first challenge is to create good content. It's not that simple. Okay, because when I do upholstery, my content is going to be about the different kind of vinyls. Not exactly the most thrilling stuff. So typically I've got to get someone in to help me create the content. Because if content isn't entertaining first, then it's going to miss the eye of most of us today. So I create the good content, and I start to get some followers and some connections and some likes and whatever you call it. You get your crowd gathering. And then as I want to run a special on my reupholstering service, I promote it into my database that sits in Facebook's hands, or database that sits in Microsoft's hands, or in Twitter's hands, or Instagram's hands. So Mark Zuckerberg is sitting with all our data, all my hard-earned followers. And I push the promotion out. And of my 1,000 followers, 5 see it. And then I get invited to boost the offering to the remainder of my followers that I have earned on a contract that said, produce good content and your followers will grow. And yet the algorithms change every fortnight. The algorithms are informed by the earnings per share growth and forecasts of these listed entities. And we have no idea how they work. So social media is about vanity. You can have 100,000 followers, it means nothing because you can't reach them without paying to play. So what's your next option? TV. So to produce a TV ad, you're starting at around 60 odd thousand rand. And to make it half decent, you're sitting at about 180, 200,000 rand. Then you have to pay for the airtime. A 30-second airtime slot on, which is your favorite channel? Mzansi Magic, SABC1. Now we already have a problem, because TV has completely fragmented. And the number of eyeballs that SABC1 used to have with generations, 10 million eyeballs a week, has completely fragmented to a number that no one can clearly specify. Who still watches TV other than streaming through Netflix or Showmax or something? I only watch YouTube. I don't watch TV anymore. I haven't had a TV for 17 years. So already, besides the fact that you can't afford it, the numbers are all wrong. So we go to magazines, and you spend 35,000 rand on a beautiful piece of photography, this newly upholstered couch, and you have a whole lot of content in the magazine. Who here bought magazines recently? Who here even gets a newspaper anymore? So let's go to my favorite medium. You come to radio. And if you have half a brain cell, the only thing that you listen to is on a Thursday night from 7 to 7:30. But radio is under massive threat. I listen to podcasts, I listen to books, I stream music. And most cars today, you can link your phone to the sound system in the car. So who listens to radio? It's in crisis. So you launch a podcast about the upholsterer's skill sets. It's like creating a piece of content. You put it onto Spotify, you put it onto iTunes, you've got to get it out there. And it's no different to creating an app. And that app will sit in the litter of the internet, along with another 100 million apps. Unless someone knows it exists, they're never going to knock on your door. And what's interesting is that last week, I did an event for event managers in the United Kingdom. We had about 3,500 people attend. Most of them have lost their businesses. And my message to them was this: it's going to come back. Because small business has no means to market anymore. The flyer, an event, the good old pavement pounding method of marketing is going to come back in full force. Because how else are you going to do it? And in the same light, retail is going to come back in a different shape and form. Selfridges has been leading the pack. And who are those guys? The very, very expensive trench coats with the checked... Burberry, thank you. There we go. So I had my first experience of new retail about 9 years ago in London. And I did an interview of the new Burberry Regent Street headquarters. And Ishmael, it worked like this. I walked into the store, and as I walked in, I had someone look at me and speak on a walkie-talkie. And coming down the stairs was this goddess. An unbelievably graceful, beautiful woman. I noticed that behind me was a female shopper. She walked into the store. And as I was looking at this apparition walk down the stairway, I saw the man speak on his walkie-talkie. And on the other stairway came this Adonis of a man. He was stunning. And I sat and waited. The female attendant came to me, and the male attendant went to the shopper behind me. She then took me on a journey through the store. And the journey resulted in me holding a 3,500 pound trench coat. As one does. And she said, given your body shape, I went for the athletic cut. Why don't you try it on? I said, I'm not in the market for a trench coat. She said, trust me, try it on. Try it on. She sent me into a changing room that had 6 mirrors. As she closed the door, remaining unfortunately outside the changing room, 3 of the mirrors turned into a TV screen. And the TV came to life and showed me sheep in the Highlands of Scotland, which is where the wool for the trench coat comes from. They started to show me pictures of how the wool was organized into the fabric, how the fabric was prepared, how the dyeing process took place. They showed me the leather belt being stitched by a very elegant old man who's a master leather craftsman. And they brought the experience of retail to life. And it is what gave me an insight to where the future of everything lies. If you look at what we need to do well in business, the first thing we need to do is specialize in doing one thing. The idea that you can be all things to all people will make you very, very unhappy. It's simply too competitive out there. The second thing is, it has got nothing to do with the upholstery. It's got everything to do with who you serve. And if you don't recognize the differences between people, in other words, if you don't learn how to discriminate, which we have unconsciously been taught never to do, you won't be able to tell the difference between the behavior of one person versus another. And once you've understood who you serve, if you can't quantify the problem you solve for them with your fantastic upholstery, it means you don't know who you serve. It's the best way to understand that you don't know who you serve. And then that's not enough, because the future of everything lies in the experience you offer in terms of how you bring them to you through marketing, how you convert them into clients through sales, how you service their upholstery through operations. And all of that is impossible to do unless you get the people part sorted. And you can't get the people part sorted unless you have those 2 steps in between. So the future of everything lies in creating the right experiences. It's a long answer.
I love that, because I think you answered everybody's question.
I hope so. It was a blanket question.
Any more questions?
Did you get the coat?
No, are you crazy? Can I tell you something? I shout at my clients if they spend money on anything but their businesses. Trust me, a 15-year-old car does the job.
Any more questions? Any questions from that side? Didn't see a hand out there. Great. Pavlo, my last question or last comment. I mean, this book has got a title here at the bottom that says, "Build your business to thrive in a crisis." It doesn't say survive. It says thrive, which is, if you know, in English language, there's a big difference between survive and thrive. In the beginning of the book, you focus quite extensively on the mindset, because I know our time tonight is too short to give all your tools and tips. But the one thing is definitely about mindset and cultivating. And you've spoken a bit about that. But what is the one thing that you would like to leave the audience with? That they can ensure that, whether it's this crisis that they need to survive and they're still feeling the effects of COVID, or whether they're out of COVID, but getting themselves ready for the next crisis. How do they get the mindset to thrive and not survive?
Can I lead with 2 things? Because there are 2 things that are equally important.
So that's the bonus option.
Yeah, it's plus one more thing.
Just one more thing.
So how do you thrive in a crisis? You know, you always have this opportunity in a crisis. So let me tell you what people will be saying 6 months from now. Okay, I'll take a stab at this. And if I'm wrong,
we'll delete the recording.
You can delete the recording and say very rude things about me. 6 months from now, we will be in a situation where we are back to 70% of what we knew before. And that 30% shift and change, you will hear people saying this. Yeah, you know, COVID changed things. COVID changed things. COVID doesn't change anything. I'll tell you how I'm seeing change occur. I'll tell you how I'm seeing that future that you were asking about, Ishmael. So, the tendency of people, and the numbers might be different. I think they would be different in South Africa. I'd say 20% of business owners in South Africa and 10% of business owners in the US and 5% of business owners in the UK. When the crisis came, if you imagine building a business is like sailing a ship. And I always give that analogy because it's such a strong analogy. Most business owners turned around and said, good grief, the storm has arrived. It's wild. It is out of control. We don't have the skills to sail through it. So what they did is they went back into harbor and they battened down the hatches and they sent their crew home. And they said, we'll wait for the storm to pass. 20% of South Africans, 10% of Americans, 5% of Europeans and British said, no. The storm is here. We're going to sail straight into it. And we're going to test the hull of our ship. And we're going to test our skills. And I'm going to test which of my crew can cope with the pressure. And we're going to get to the other side of the storm so that when it passes, we are way ahead of all our competitors. And they then brought about the change by resetting their businesses and offerings differently as a result of the change in status quo that the crisis brought us, so that when the remainder of competitors come out, whilst they're on the front foot, the competitors will be on the back foot. And they will say, the market's changed, crisis. COVID changed the market for us. You know, we now need to adjust. No, COVID's a virus. It comes and it goes. The changes that were wrought by an attitude that says the following, and this is what I want to leave you with. Where is it? My conclusions are always short. Here, the conclusion. I'll just read the first paragraph. The past is second-hand. The present tells you who you are, and the future is yours to make. A life well lived recognizes the value in each instance, building on them to be better and to do better. We create the future. We create the future. If you have the right mindset and you don't back down, we create the future.
Pavlo, thank you so much. Big round of applause for Pavlo, please. Pavlo, that was amazing.
Thank you.
I mean, once again, you've exceeded our expectations. You've definitely exceeded my expectations. You've shared gracefully, gratefully of your knowledge, and we are extremely, extremely grateful for your presence here with the Business Book Club tonight. Thank you so much. And just a little token of our appreciation, we'd like to offer you that gift. Thank you so much, Pavlo.
Is it a reset, rebuild, reignite?
Well, we couldn't top it, so we gave you one with empty pages where you can write the next one.
There is another one coming out.
Good to hear, good to hear. And we also just like to thank our sponsor, The Rock. Guys, thank you so much for giving us this venue. It's always a great place to hang out. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much. The food here is delicious. The drinks are nice and cold. And yeah, the service is great. So The Rock, thank you so much for hosting the business book club. All right, and then I would like to just hand over to Bruce, who would announce our winner of the evening.
Thank you, Joel. I gotta say, the winner for tonight, I gotta give you 10 marks for creativity. You really kept on our authors very, very well in the wine glass. So I think that's the first I've seen that. So you truly showed your appreciation for this place and our authors. So Paula, Quincy, our winner for tonight.
There we go.
Thank you.
Are you going to take a photograph of this?
Do you have to for social media?
Yes, sure.
There we go.
There you go. Cool, excellent. A work of art.
Well, at least one of us. Appreciate that.
Great, thank you. And Pablo, are you available afterwards for book signing?
Yes, sir.
All right, so Pablo's book is available at the back to sell. Papa, how much for the book? Pablo, how much for the book? $250 tonight. This is a real good seller. The stories in here is amazing. So, you know, we learn through stories, and Pablo has really shared gracefully the stories of his clients and the people that he knows and works with. So we are very grateful for that. And that concludes the evening. So thank you for joining us. Please stay, mingle, and we'd love to see you next year at our next events. Thank you so much.